In the conversation which follows, we probe further into the realm of myth, discussing the richness of the mythologies created by so-called primitive societies, compared to the barren mythologies of modern culture, the relevance of ritual, the importance of what Joseph called inward knowledge, and the question which, he said, we all must face: to what social group do I belong? Campbell argued that there is now only one social group, all of humankind, and we face a critical need to create a mythology reflecting that fact. This conversation took place in the spring of 1978, when Joseph was 73. One of the most exciting things about doing a live interview with Joseph was being able to afford our listeners the chance to call in and ask their own questions of him directly. You'll hear several call-in questions and Joseph's answers in this program. We begin with a deceptively simple topic, fairy tales, and our relative lack of appreciation for them.
You know, when we were children, Joseph, fairy tales was a big thing. And somehow when we move into adulthood and maturity and all of that, we lose the fairy tale. What happens?
I think we lose the sense of wonder. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, says Wordsworth, you remember? And he becomes a stuffy person. My wife, Jean Erdman, has a theater in New York now, and among the presentations are some puppet plays. He has a puppet theater for children. And of course, these are full of fantasy, and they're lovely, lovely things. And the parents bring the children, usually the mother, and the delight of the children in the event often gives the parent the delight, too. They return to the childhood, you know, and get into the spirit of the magic of the fairy tale. The fairy tale is talking to us about the wonder of our own psyches again. They carry the archetypes that are in the old myths. And it's the sort of inability to experience the myth of our own religion. Our religions have been interpreted to us in historical terms. The Jews did go through the Red Sea, and Moses did climb the mountain, and he got the law, and he came down, and he broke the tablets, and he went up and got a second edition and came down again. It's interpreted that way, not the mystery side of it, not the event as symbolic of quests and all in the individual. And so, when the fairy tale comes along and doesn't have any actuality, it doesn't pretend ever to have happened, but is simply of the mystery kind, we have been trained away from receiving the message.
Yeah, it's almost like we use it, that's a fairy tale.
It's a fairy tale.
It's not real.
Yeah. People who like true stories, you know, and so people write true stories that aren't true at all, and then people enjoy reading them, whereas if they thought they weren't true, they would be indifferent to them. Well, I think it's the loss of the ability to take seriously the images of the imagination, and the wish always for the newspaper truth, you know, that weans people away from the sense of magic of their own lives and of these tales.
Yeah. How can we get back in touch with that magic?
Bring the kids to the show. or read your fairy tales to the children. You know, or read fairy tales after you've read, let's say, a little bit of Jung, and just see how the whole thing is there, how they are realizations of dreams, how the motifs are playing. Bultmann, you know, the great theologian of just the last generation, speaking about demythologizing religion. My thought is it should be re-mythologized, not reading it as fact. When we read the legends of the Buddhas, you know, Avalokiteshvara or Amida or these, we don't read of those as though they were historical characters, because they weren't, and they never have been given as historical characters. We should look at some of our own mythological material that way and get the truth from them, and then turn to the little fairy tales, and you'll see that it's there too. I'm very much for fairy tale as the introduction to high symbolic systems. In fact, I did a commentary on Grimm's fairy tales that was published by Pantheon Books, and there I bring this out, that the backgrounds of the fairy tale are those of the myths as well.
What is the relevance of ritual in our life?
A ritual is the enactment of a myth. And by participating in the ritual, you're participating in the myth. And since the myth is a projection of the depth wisdom of the psyche, by participating in the ritual, participating in the myth, you are being, as it were, put in accord with that wisdom, which is the wisdom that is inherent within you anyhow. Your consciousness is being reminded of the wisdom of your own life. I think ritual is terribly important.
Yeah, I've been involved in some discussions recently with people of the Catholic faith talking about their unhappiness with the change in the ritual, that no longer the Latin Mass and that kind of thing, and seemingly very, very upset about that because somehow the mystery has gone. The mystery is no longer there.
It's been flattened out, I would say, but I was brought up a Catholic, but I haven't been to Mass for 50 years. I did go to the Mass of my mother's funeral and of a niece's wedding, and, well, all I could say was that I had lost contact. For me, one of the marvelous things about the Roman Catholic Mass in Latin was that no matter where you went, you were at home in the Catholic Mass. I remember as a youngster being in Switzerland, going to Mass there, or in France, or in Germany, just as at home as I would have been in my own parish church. And now with it translated into the local language, that Catholicity, that universality has been taken away. Furthermore, the thing is rather flat. The English isn't particularly elegant into which it has been translated, and the Latin was elegant.
Yes, right.
And also the address of the priest now turned around so that he faces the congregation rather than facing the mystery also changes the whole mood. It turns it into a kind of, well, one could say a Protestant social rather than a Gothic mystical performance. Yeah. I'm not saying that it's an inferior performance. I'm saying it's not the same thing at all. And if you are brought up to appreciate the mysterious, which is what the world is, a mystery, then I think you suffer a loss. Although I've talked about this with priests, and they've just told me I don't know what I'm talking about because I haven't experienced the modern Mass as it is rendered.
Yeah.
So it's something I shouldn't talk about.
Joseph, I was reflecting on relative to our own society. Largely, America has been, use the term, policeman for the world, father of the world, coming in and taking care of those less fortunate, less privileged, etc. And now we have a strong women's movement in the society. And do you see there any changes taking place? Do you see us moving out of a patriarchal model, out of being a father to the world, and perhaps being something else?
With respect to this women's moment, I taught for 38 years in Sarah Lawrence College, and so was very close to young women and very seriously concerned with their character and potentialities and so forth and so on. We're at a marvelous moment with respect to the problem of women, and it's a moment that is just as crucial for men as for women, because the archetypology of just the wife and mother and housewife is gone. And many a man, when he marries, when he thinks of marriage, thinks of that archetype, and he is unwilling to face or unable to face the fact of a female personality. Men have had a bigger range of life courses that have enabled them to develop their potentials. I spoke before, earlier, of the potential and developing one's own life. But women have been condemned, you might say, to one style, one system of interests and concerns. And that's not true anymore. The world has opened up to them. Now there are no models for them. And the immediate model is, of course, the men's world, and many move into that in competition, as it were. But the great thing is the emergence of the possibility of a female personality as the guiding image of the woman's own life. And then her husband has to match that. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. He's in dialogue now with an unpredictable presence because the sexes are deeply mysterious to each other, really, and wonderfully so. At college reunions, 10 years after, 20 years after, 30 years after, I would have taught this young woman and recognized certain possibilities. It's easy to tell when the girl comes back, when the woman comes back, whether the husband has been a counterplayer to a personality, which of course helps develop his personality rather than his archetypology of just husband, or the woman who has not been allowed really to flower in her own potential, but has been turned into an archetype. I mean, it's right there in front of you, and you see these young women. And this is the challenge of a marriage. What a beautiful thing, a life together as growing personalities, each helping the other to flower, rather than just moving into a standard archetype. It's a wonderful moment. People can make the decision whether they want to just be cookie mold products, or something quite astonishing and unexpected.
Somehow the latter seems more interesting.
It's more adventurous and a little more dangerous.
Yes, it requires jumping over the edge a little more.
Yeah.
With no life raft.
No life raft at all.
Right. Going back to the question about could you amplify on the mystery of the male to the female and the mystery of the female to the male beyond the social, cultural model, than any other amplification you can give to that one?
That's for poetry, and it's a beautiful thought. But I don't feel competent right off the cuff to address myself to anything really so profoundly wonderful. One experiences it in one's life, and in various ways. And I think, personally, it runs through the whole of life, this counterplay. Even people who react against it or who think themselves as not in touch with it, I think are moved by it very, very deeply and profoundly and in mysterious ways. Well, as I told you earlier, I just celebrated my 40th anniversary yesterday. I think I've experienced this wonder in a beautiful way for a long time. And others who have managed to stick it out, you might say, will know what I'm talking about.
Let's take a phone call. Hello, you're on the air.
I'm reading Ortega's What is Philosophy, and he discusses how a man discovers his inner self. The point that Ortega makes is that ancient man was so beset by external problems, he had no time to think of internal problems. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Ortega happens to be one of my great favorites, but I would not be inclined to agree with that particular remark, because I think that ancient man was considerably concerned with internal problems, and I think that he solved them often in better ways than we're solving them right now. It was not that he was not concerned with them. There are two kinds of primitive man, in this context. One, the people who are living in rather arid and unproductive lands whose whole lives are given to the struggle for just sheer existence. And in those cultures, you find only fragmentary mythological structures. But when you come to people like the Northwest Coast Indians here, or the Polynesians, or the Pueblo people in our Southwest, or the Iroquois and Algonquins of the Northeast forests, these mythologies are rich and developed and highly sophisticated mythologies. And some of them go a little further in the understanding of man than our normal positivist philosophers do. I would just like to call attention to that lovely book that Neihat published, Black Elk Speaks, and read the words of that old medicine man. His vision came to him when he was a youngster, as in a shamanistic crisis. And it included a statement that matches one of the most sophisticated statements in 12th century philosophy. He said, in my vision, I saw myself on the central mountain of the world, Mount Harmon in South Dakota. But he said, the central mountain of the world is everywhere. He there distinguished between the cult image, you see, of Mount Harmon, and the reference of the cult image. And this corresponds to a word that comes to us from the book of the 24 philosophers, a Hermetic text of the 12th century, or at least a Greek text that was translated into Latin in the 12th century. God is an intelligible sphere whose circumference is nowhere and center everywhere. It's the same thing. This is not only an inward knowledge, it's a metaphysical realization. And I find things like that, sayings like that, all over the place when I'm reading the words that have been taken from these non-literate sages. No, I'm inclined to think that they were very much concerned with the inner man. But as for Ortega y Gasset, there are great things that man has written, and I would recommend as a major introduction to his way of thinking, that wonderful early book of his, Meditations on Don Quixote. That's where he points out that in the period of Galileo, a crisis occurred. Formerly, the hero in the Arthurian romances, for instance, moved into a landscape that was ready to receive his psyche. That is to say, what he was ready to experience presented itself to him, so that the landscape was, as it were, a projection of his own psychological problems, potentialities, and realizations. Whereas with Galileo, the landscape suddenly becomes hard, and Don Quixote goes out, and instead of the landscape being what he expected, it turns out to be windmills. You know that story. And this is then the problem of the adventurous spirit of man against the hard wall, of the scientifically documented world. And where now is the adventure? You read that, and it's a sophisticated, beautiful job. Of course, that is a system of inward problems that the primitive man knows nothing about. This one of facing such a world as we know.
Yes.
And, well, with that, perhaps that might be the answer to what Ortega y Gasset was talking about, and my controversion of his statement might be out of place.
That's a profound question you just asked, too. Where now is the adventure?
Yeah, where is the adventure?
I'd like to ask you, if you're traveling around a lot, you're seeing a lot of people, talking to a lot of people, what do you see happening? What kind of a vision do you have of what's going on outside of what we read in the newspapers and see on television?
Well, I think America is a very different thing from what we see in the newspapers and see on television. I find beautiful people everywhere, people seriously concerned with these things. We hear and read of America as materialistic, and gadget conscious and all of that. That's an outside aspect of it all. I've been in practically every part of this country now within the past, since I retired from teaching, the past 5 years. And everywhere it's the same. And it's a different people from the people you meet in Europe. There's a quality in this country that is of this country. And it has to do with a rather relaxed relationship to other human beings and a freedom in thinking about new thoughts. We don't have, it's an old story, and I feel that I'm saying an old hackneyed thing. We don't have great heavy traditions behind us. And there's a big value here, particularly in a world where the traditions are collapsing. People are initiating their own lives in a certain way. I find a wonderful quality of compassion for suffering people everywhere, and it often redounds to our own disadvantage. In fact, it has in a conspicuous way. We don't seem to mind that. We go on. With respect to the religious life, I have surprises. I was down in Alabama, and only a couple of weeks ago, and there I found the real radicals were the Methodists. you know what I mean? The Foursquare Gospel and the Baptists were the basic people there, and I didn't think there was that kind of thing in the world anymore. But it's very strong. So one can't say something that goes for all of America. It's one section, another section. I've been used mostly to urban and university people, but when I go out, then I find another thing. And the thing that strikes me there is the lovely quality of it all. I mean, the religion there is working in the way of a humanizing function, which I had forgotten lay in its possibilities.
Let's take another phone call. Hello, you're on the air.
Okay, I'm afraid you may have, Mr. Campbell, over the past few minutes, may have answered my question. I was wanting to ask, and it's a little hard to put this into words, but I was wanting to ask about how we get a handle on myth today. What is myth in the modern world? Is the mythic dimension evolving or mutating, or myth still being produced, or is there something about our technological, materialistic, factual-oriented reality that is antithetical to myth, and that's going to sort of dissolve?
Okay, thank you.
All of the old mythological systems grew up within the bounded horizon, and they were addressed to people who had essentially the same order of experiences, so that a signal would be understood in the same way and be responded to in similar ways by everybody involved in the culture. Now, in our world, those horizons are all smashed. I mean, there's a main point in my thinking about the contemporary world. One of the main decisions to make with respect to your own mythology is to what society do you belong? Because one of the functions of myth is the integration of a social system. Social system is blown. And what is our social group? The challenge of the day is that our social group is all of mankind, but there aren't many people who can swallow that. It's a big load. And what I'm seeing all over the place are retreats into group alignments against other people. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a closing in. This is a very natural response, particularly with the national order smashed in a certain way, and with a great multiplicity of human types in any given place. We've tried to hold our culture together rationally. Do you see, it's essentially a secular society, not a mythologically grounded society. We've allowed people to find their own myth, their own religion, and so forth. That's the essential of this country. And nevertheless, what is the sociological side of this new thing? I don't see a single mythology coming out at all. The dominant power in our present world is politics and economics. This has nothing to do with mythology. The culture form does not really teach a mythological experience, so that you don't find those psychological grounds given you in the culture. The old days, when you would enter a town, the highest building is the cathedral. It's a spiritual, grounded culture that was, based on the whole myth of fall, redemption, salvation, and the church as the vehicle of grace.
I was just thinking of the highest building in San Francisco, like the Bank of America World Headquarters or the Transamerica Pyramid.
That's exactly the point I'm coming to. That tells you what's running the place. It's business buildings and dwelling buildings, so that it's politics and economics. There's no doubt about it. And the mythology, then, is left to the individual to find. And we need it. Everybody needs it. And each is on his own quest right now. Now, whether later on something else will come of it, I mean, it's much too early to predict anything like that. But I can think of an earlier moment when agriculture came in, you know, and that small hunting and gathering societies were archaic, and a whole new world, a whole new mythology, plowing the earth and all of this. It took hundreds of years before this congealed into a viable and life-supporting and city-supporting mythology. So perhaps we are in a transitional state. But I'm told that Adam said to Eve when they were expelled from the garden, this is a transitional moment. And perhaps the essence of progressing life is exactly that. But we're certainly in it. I think of us as in a kind of free fall into the future without any guides for our spirits. And the individual has to find it in the way of his own darkest place where there is no way or path. I don't see anything coming in the way of a common mythology. I don't even know whether a culture can survive without a mythology. It's a moment of questions and mystery, I think.
Do you see this coming together in these retreats into little conclaves, protecting our own, whether it be industry or technology or this cult or that tradition or that religion, whatever, as kind of a last-ditch effort to avoid the coming together of everyone? The idea of seeing that planet out there hanging in space, everyone got the idea that we are all here together, finally, and that was an experiential moment for the whole planet. Do you see these conclaves as sort of a last-ditch fight to hold on to their own?
I'm something of an optimist, and I have my hopes. I hope they are last-ditch fights. And when I think of some common thing that's coming up now, I think the ecological problem may be the common thing. When everybody realizes we're knocking our environment out, we got to get together on that. Then our relationship to the earth, we'll all have the same problem. Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
that is the kind of the background of a kind of base
out of a problem that affects everyone, we can come to unity.
And to realize then that there's a mutual concern and compassion for other people instead of fighting for your little bit, because you're ruining the planet.
Yes.
That may be something that might begin to work.